As Jung-Soo mentioned, my name is Steve, and I am your third straight English session in a row. So now I know that while listening in English is probably very easy for you, it can be very tiring. So thank you in advance for listening to me, and I hope over the next few minutes I do two things. One, I want to share how some companies are looking at infrastructure. And number two is I want to encourage you to think slightly different about your application all the way through to the hardware layer. So first of all, thank you to the organizers of the event, and thank you to SK for hosting this event. What a great facility. It's groups like this that really make things happen. Large companies are good, but it's the individuals within those companies that help people move and do different things. So I want to share with you a couple of examples around the importance of being open. Open source affects a lot of things other than software. How many people in here have ever been in a data center? Okay, that's less than 20, okay? Same with me. 3 years ago, I'd never been in a data center. So hopefully today I share a little bit about what people are doing inside the data center that make your applications run pretty easily. Open source is affecting many things outside of the traditional software area. This here is a chart put together by the people that map human DNA, the human genome, and the cost associated with that. This side is the cost, and down here is the timeline. Back in 2000, it would cost me $100 million to map my human genome, my DNA. And then right around 2007, something happened, and you can see what happened to the cost of this environment. So anybody have an idea what happened in 2007? All right, I'll answer it for you. In 2007, the people, the companies, the individuals that work on this particular project, mapping a genome, got together and they said one thing: how about if we decide as a group, as a community, that any result that we get by working on the human genome, any test results we get, we have to publish to the entire community within 24 hours. We have to make our test results public within 24 hours. And that's what happens to the cost when a community gets together and decides to share. And now you can get your human genome mapped for about $1,000. It also affects the hardware space. This young lady here actually won an award at the recent OpenStack Summit in America. The fastest growing open source company in America is a hardware manufacturer. I do not know how to pronounce that company's name, but Adafruit or Adafruit, and they make a variety of different electronic equipment. But again, open source has a big impact outside of just software. But the software piece eats hardware. And as as the previous speaker had indicated, you can actually do a lot on a lot less within the hardware space. This is what IDC says, that around 30% of your relationships are going to change if you have a traditional OEM or a traditional relationship with your IT vendor that's moving. I think that this number is very low. It's much higher in Asia than 30%. In some areas of Asia, it's much lower than 30%. Singapore is an example. it's lower. Here, I think it's lower. China, it's higher. So it depends on the area within Asia. Again, the previous speaker had alluded a little bit to this around the advent of VMware and what it actually happens to the hardware. Right now, you can run the same type of applications on around 66% less physical hardware. Back in 2007, Facebook was going through some pretty significant growth on their web servers. So they actually put together a team and created Hip Hop Virtual Machine and Hack to handle their web servers. They were able to reduce the number of web servers they needed by 80%. So again, software eating the hardware. This is an embedded YouTube link. I encourage you to take a look at it if you can. This is Deutsche Telekom's CTO from a Red Hat seminar 2 years ago. And he talks about that they are not rebuilding, but they're building cloud-enabled apps. 85% of the apps on just 20% of the physical servers. 2/3 reduction of the server hardware. So if all of this software is eating the hardware, what do you think is happening to the hardware business? Dell, HP, Cisco, they doing well? Not well. Worldwide revenue growth up 4% year over year. Prior to this quarter, it flattened out. But prior to that, 6 straight quarters of double-digit growth on revenue and server shipments. So where's it all going? Who's buying it? These different colors here, you have HP in the lime green, you have Dell in the dark blue, you have this purple space here. The ODM stands for Original Design Manufacturer. It's the people that are making the stuff for the OEMs. So in the past, if I wanted a server, I pick up the phone and I call my OEM, my server provider, and they send me a server. Now, I can go direct to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer will sell it to me direct if I have the right business model and I'm the right customer. These ODMs are doing open compute. How many people in here have heard of OCP, or Open Compute Project? All right, good. A few more than have been in the data center. So, the other company I wanted to highlight is Infra. Anybody heard of Infra before? The 3rd largest server maker in the world, based in China. Okay? So when you include the purple and this other green space here for the 3rd largest, you see where the bulk of the server manufacturers are selling. A lot of it's going to the ODMs direct. Not to Dell, not to HP, but to the ODMs direct. People are buying direct from the manufacturer. So who's buying? Well, one is 5G is causing a lot of this, and the open infrastructure. Telcos, cloud service providers, all looking at new hardware, which I'll get to in a minute, looking at new types of hardware instead of the old traditional hardware to do old traditional things. The last 20 customers I've spoken to, healthcare, banks, cloud service providers, when I ask them, why are you looking at open types of hardware, open designs? It's all to run new applications. It's not to run VMware. It's to run Hadoop and Kubernetes and everything that you're in this room for. This is another great example. AT&T in America. Press release. They're moving away from proprietary hardware and replacing it with white box products. So if you've heard the business model, I'm going generic or white box, this is buying direct from the ODMs. But more importantly is, sure, it makes sense to buy direct from the manufacturer if I can, if I have the right size. But what AT&T is encouraging people to do is they're telling their manufacturer, I'll buy from you, I'll help you design the product that I want, but then you open source it so that everybody else can do it, so that we can share and drive down the cost and share best practices. So I have two people here from people that are very knowledgeable about helping AT&T and such a thing, from EdgeCore Networks, this company right here that's in the silver spot down there with the black logo. George Chaparian and Peter, stand up real quick. All right. George is the president and CEO. So right after my session at 12:40, George is going to have a presentation in the building next door, and he's going to talk in detail around open networking and the network switch and what's happening at 5G. So I encourage you, I am not the guy to talk about this, he is, so I encourage you to go listen to that. This is an announcement from 2010 when Facebook announced that they were going to build their own data centers. So prior to that, they had not built their own data centers. They used a regular data center co-location provider. They started to ask themselves, if I'm going to build my brand new data center, I can do with it what I want. What can we get rid of? Do I need a battery backup? Can I raise the temperature of my server? What can I actually eliminate? From that, they took the community angle. So they said, great, I'm going to design all of this, server, compute, storage, networking, my data center facility, and then I'm going to open source it and just see what happens. Well, that is, along with Goldman, Microsoft, Rackspace, and Intel, is what started the Open Compute Foundation in 2011. So it's a technical nonprofit. It works very similar to OpenStack and Linux in the fact that we have a group of companies that get together and work on projects in an open source environment at the hardware layer. So open source software has been around for many years. It's now moving into the hardware space. There are 4 things that we care about: efficiency, scale, openness, and impact. These are not new, they're not earth-shattering, but they are things that we care about deeply within Open Compute. These are our projects, all available on opencompute.org. 6,000 engineers across these projects working on common problems. One company said it best when they said, I joined Open Compute to solve problems I cannot solve myself. And that is the benefit of open source. We have a list of companies. There are 2 or 3 that I think may be of interest. In the last year and a half ago, we had nobody from mainland China because they do their own sort of open source thing internally. Within the last 18 months, we've had all big 3, Alibaba, Baidu, and Tencent, JD.com, Inspur, who I'd mentioned earlier, Huawei, everybody joining because these companies are expanding outside of China in certain markets. And they want to leverage open compute technology outside as they build. And then now it's internalizing as well, where they're starting to use open compute internally within China. So we're seeing a great deal of growth in North Asia, not so much in Southeast Asia yet. Korean companies that are participating. Jungsu, get up. Samsung, this guy has been a workhorse, both for open compute. He's the biggest open compute champion in Korea. So Jungsu, thank you very much with Samsung. All right, TerraTech, anybody here from TerraTech? All right, they're a systems integrator based here. And then lastly, SGI. SGI, Jeff, stand up. All right. Jeff Choi, they do HPC, so high performance computing. All right, so I recommend track these guys down, find out a little bit about why they actually joined Open Compute. We do have regional communities. The most important thing is to note that we have around 30% of our companies are based in APAC. However, the people that visit our website, 4 out of the top 5 countries that visit our website are all from Asia. 4 out of the top 5. India, China, Taiwan, Japan, Korea. All right, we do actually have some software projects I'm going to highlight because it's relevant for maybe what you're working on the network side. This all has to do with open networking, which George will talk to in a little bit. But ONI, which is the open network install, SI, which is the switch abstraction interface, Open Network Linux, and then lastly, which is Sonic. Sonic is an open networking software that Microsoft released 2.5 years ago. And it has grown significantly. It is the fastest growing software networking project we have. I just want you to highlight and see some of the companies that are taking Sonic and deploying it at scale. All within the last 2 years. Some pretty significant names, including DD that just joined as well. But I would encourage you, if you have any interest in the networking software, look up Sonic, Microsoft, and you'll see all the different areas that are happening. China is a big adopter of Sonic. So who's buying? I already went through the ODMs and who they're selling it to. Within Open Compute, we're around 4 OCP designs specifically. So ODM is a big, broad category, but OCP specifically is around 4 billion of the market, going to be about 5%, 10% of the market in the next 4 or 5 years. And where we're seeing the adoption, again, telco, cloud service providers, and then we'll see automobile manufacturers and manufacturing itself take up open designs. HPC-oriented big data, HPC clusters. I'm just going to pull out 3 or 4 examples because one of the bigger areas of open compute is not just being able to buy directly from the manufacturer where you save some on the CapEx, but also on the operation expense. ING Bank, hardware layer, reducing TCO and OpEx. The operation expense, to give you a sense of what happens when you're dealing with open compute designs. We get rid of all the stuff that you don't need. For example, every open compute server is toolless. You do not need a tool to change anything on the server. It's all just touch points. Pull, change a hard drive, push it in. The average server to technician ratio in a data center is usually 1 technician for every 2,000 to 3,000 servers. In a Facebook data center, it is 1 technician for every 25,000 servers. They do not need to change parts very often. Microsoft just does it on a periodic basis. Again, all software driven, all OCP type of designs. If you're using one of the big cloud providers, you're using OCP designs in their hardware. All of the big guys use OCP designs. London Internet Exchange, Booking.com, 40% less energy based on the way that these servers are designed. And PayPal using open networking, again, on edge core switches. OCP in the rest of Asia. There is OCP happening in every one of these countries, even in Cambodia. I asked the company in Cambodia, why are you doing open computing? And they said, I'm tired of paying Cisco support. Now let's see how well that goes because they have to do their own support. So he thinks he can do it with a team of about 5 people. There's a lot of benefit that an OEM brings, support being one of them. But if you have the team and you have an open source mindset, you should really start to consider some open hardware designs. Now I'm going to move slightly off of the hardware side of things, and I'll move more into the environmental area of why open compute matters. Europe is taking the lead on some of this regulation that I don't see here in Asia yet, but I do see it coming to Asia soon. This is legislation that just passed in Europe that has to do with regulation coming in on the server efficiency. So they will mandate that servers that are running in Europe have to reach a certain efficiency standard at idle. So 2 speakers ago, you heard the gentleman talk about most servers run at only 3% utilization. Well, actually, most servers run at idle, a large percentage of them. So now there'll be regulation that dictates how efficient a server must be sitting at idle. And there was a lot of pushback in Europe from some of the very big OEMs to not have this come through. But on the ODM side, the way that OCP is designed, we actually can run 50% more efficient at idle than a normal server. And that matters for people who have high energy costs. In America, people don't care that much about energy cost. In Japan, they care quite a bit. So it depends again on your geography. Another big thing is around circular economy. Has anybody ever heard the term circular economy? It's about reuse, not recycle, but reuse. Think about the top 7 to 10 companies in the world. How many servers do you think that Amazon and Google and Alibaba and all of these guys are buying? They're probably buying several 100,000 a year. If they refresh their servers every 3 to 5 years, how many servers do you think are coming back onto the market? And where are they going? If I get rid of a server, do I just dump it in the ground? That server may only be 3 years old. If I'm a traditional bank, or maybe somebody that doesn't need the latest hardware, I can still use that server for another 3 years. But it may have proprietary firmware. It may have proprietary BIOS. It may have locked-in software. But with Open Compute, the way it's designed, with open systems firmware, with Linux boot, you can wipe it clean with open source. You're pulling it out of the large companies. You're recertifying it. You're putting open systems firmware on it. You're able to image that, and you're able to send it to tier 2 cloud service providers, to testing labs, to companies that don't need the latest and greatest. And it works, and we're selling a lot of this in Europe. There's a company that's doing this exact same business model, and we're selling it all over the world, not to secondhand companies, but to top-tier companies, aero defense companies using secondhand gear at a fraction of the cost. So I anticipate, as we mature in this industry, there will be more regulation around, if I'm designing something, can I reuse it? And what is the life expectancy of that product? One of the last topics I'll talk about is liquid cooling. So this liquid cooling has been around for several years, but it is now, in the last 6 months, really taken off. With GPUs and AI becoming more prevalent, the racks run very, very hot. It's a lot of heat that's generated, to the point where air-cooled data centers are going to have a very tough time handling all the heat. So everyone now is looking at different ways of doing liquid-cooled or immersion cooling racks. Facebook and Microsoft are partnering together within the community, again, working under a project to do advanced cooling. And Huawei, again, announced as well that they will be doing Open Compute in their data centers rolling out. And Huawei will be doing a variation of Open Compute racks that allow both liquid-cooled and air-cooled. So Huawei certainly serves a broader market than just those top 10 or 20 accounts. And that's what we're seeing now. Started with the big guys, and now it's moving down into the traditional enterprise. We certainly can't do it alone. We've talked a lot about community. These are our partners as well. We work very closely with these other organizations. And together, it makes a pretty compelling value proposition for any company. I saw a very interesting RFP 6 months ago from a very large Asia telco. And on that RFP, they were going to source and buy hardware. One of their questions on the RFP to the vendors was, what open source organizations do you belong to? How many contributions have you made to those open source organizations? And what do you plan to do in those open source organizations? It's the very first time I've ever seen an entire section of an RFP for open source. And I hope to see more of it. We have a marketplace as well. You can browse some of the products, but primarily you would work with guys like George to source all this. But it is available in Korea, and we hope to get some more adoption here. But right now it's primarily in Japan and China that we're seeing the adoption. Yahoo uses a lot of OCP gear, as well as NTT is starting to. Thought for the day, I'll leave you with this. Whatever market open source starts, it ends up dominating. So, I think you guys did it. You stayed awake for the third consecutive English-speaking presentation. Again, thank you. I know how hard it is to listen in your non-native language. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right.